Planet Dolan.
Who escaped a death sentence only to get it faster? Who escaped from death row before even being put on it? From prison escapes to legal rulings, here are 10 people who managed to escape death row.
My name is Nixium, and today, I'll be your narrator.
Number 10. KRISTEN Gilbert was a nurse who worked at a veterans hospital when she decided to go on a murderous little rampage. She injected 4 of her patients with a stimulant that killed them via heart failure, and tried to do the same to 3 others. But Gilbert lived in Massachusetts, which doesn't observe the death penalty, so how exactly did she end up anywhere close to death row? Well, the VA hospital is technically federal government property, and since Gilbert committed her crimes in the hospital, it was tried in a federal court. But despite the loophole that made Gilbert eligible for the death penalty, she ended up with only life in prison. Number 9. This escape from death row in Vietnam didn't exactly happen in a courtroom. A pair of drug dealers were each in solitary confinement for their involvement in a heroin smuggling ring. Murder, theft, bribery, and kidnapping were among the charges that they had been convicted of. The 2 were awaiting execution, but were able to escape the facility. They drove away together on a Honda Dream motorbike, wearing masks and helmets to hide their identities. Luckily, they were only on the run for about a week before they were recaptured. Number 8. Nicholas Yaris spent 22 years on death row in Pennsylvania. For some, that may seem silly. If somebody has been sentenced to death, why keep them in prison for so long? Well, people like Yaris are why. After being on death row for 22 years on capital murder and rape charges, DNA evidence cleared him of the crime entirely, putting him nowhere near the scene. Now Yaris is the first death row inmate in Pennsylvania, and the 15th in America cleared of his crime with DNA evidence before execution. But because Yaris was exonerated of his crime, he got no help from parole services at finding a job. He also got no money from the state from his wrongful conviction, just $5.07 of his own money. Number 7. Another Vietnamese drug lord found a much different way to avoid a death sentence. Nicknamed the Rose of Fire, she joined up with a major drug runner in China to open a major underground smuggling operation. Well, she was eventually captured and sentenced to death, but she found a loophole. Under Vietnamese criminal law, pregnant women cannot be sentenced to death. So what did she do? Well, she paid one of the male inmates in the prison to, not have sex with her. She paid him to leave her 2 bags of his semen so that she could impregnate herself with a syringe. And it worked, and her sentence was commuted to life in prison. Number 6. Deontay Rasiles didn't even wait to be sentenced to death before he escaped from it. In the hearing for the murder of Jill Halliburton Sue of the Halliburton Oil Company family, Rasiles simply ran. He unlocked his chains and cuffs, shed his prisoner's uniform, and bolted from the courtroom. An internal investigation into his escape implicated as many as 8 accomplices, including the bailiffs in the courtroom. Ultimately, Rasiles was recaptured after a 6-day manhunt. Number 5. Martin Garul somehow managed to escape both his death sentence and move it way forward. In 1998, Garul became the first escaped death row inmate in Texas since Floyd Hamilton, a member of the Bonnie and Clyde gang in 1934. His scheme involved dummies, a climb over razor wire, and a run through gunfire, but it worked. He got outside of the prison. A few days later, he was found dead at the bottom of a swampy river, presumably having drowned. So instead of escaping his death sentence, he simply carried it out himself. Number 4. Steve Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky avoided the death penalty, basically by pure luck. As they waited for their sentences to be carried out, the state of Connecticut ruled that capital punishment was unconstitutional. Neither of these men, or the other 9 living death row inmates in Connecticut, are having their crimes cleared though, of course. But because of the ruling, their sentences are being reduced to life without parole rather than death. Number 3. After 22 years on death row in Tennessee, Paul House was released on bail. But why would a convicted rapist and a murderer be granted bail from a death sentence? Well, that's because in 2006, the Supreme Court took up his case and granted him a new hearing. DNA evidence examined the semen, cigarette butts, and the blood under the victim's fingernails, and none of it matched House. The victim's blood was found on House's jeans, but there were unanswered questions about whether the evidence was contaminated on the way to the forensics lab. The result of House's hearing wasn't just that he had his death sentence reduced. He was cleared of the crime entirely and let go as a free man. Number 2. The Titanic was considered an unsinkable ship. It sank in half of a journey. In a similar case, the Mecklenburg maximum security prison in Virginia was considered escape-proof. 6 death row inmates escaped from it, though, in less than 2 hours using a stretcher, a blanket, and a portable television. They overpowered the guards, started a prison riot, put on the guards' riot gear, and called in a false bomb threat. Then, they acted as the bomb squad, carrying out the TV on the stretcher under a blanket as the bomb. All 6 of the escapees were recaptured within a few weeks, which is good since they were all convicted of a string of violent crimes. Number 1. In 1972, the California Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional. That led to a whole bunch of legal complications with what had since been named the Class of '72. More than 100 people were on death row in California when that ruling came down. Most of them ended up with life sentences, but about 40% of those death row inmates found themselves getting paroled. 3 of those parolees ended up killing again after going free, and 12 ended up committing some other type of crime. One of them, Dennis Stanworth, killed his own 90-year-old mother. At the trial, he pled guilty to everything before even being asked for a plea, and begged the court for death.
Come on, kill me, I'm here!
What? Danger Dawn, did you know that we have a countdown book featuring some of our best scripts on sale now? Links down below for the physical and ebook versions.
And that's it, everyone. See ya.